superimpose the major scale in thirds, we found major triads on scale degrees 1, 4, and 5, and minor triads on scale degrees 2, 3, and 6. Click on the link below for a more thorough review of this. If I continue this pattern, these major and minor triads become extended to include an additional voice. Minor triads 2, 3, and 6 now become minor 7 chords, with intervals 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. Major triads 1 and 4 become major 7 chords, intervals 1, 3, 5, 7. The 5 chord, however, becomes a dominant 7 or 5-7 chord, intervals 1, 3, 5, flat 7. There are several ways to form these 5-7 chords. Let's look at two very common movable forms. The first is a C form, which looks like this. You can simply start with a conventional first position C form of C, then just drop your pinky down on the 3rd fret of string 3 in order to make it a dominant 7 chord. Just avoid open strings 6 and 1. And this form can be moved up the neck to play any dominant 7 chord, depending on where the root lands. There's a link below if you need a refresher on movable chord forms. Here's another common movable form, which we will call an E form, since it looks most like an altered E form of the E major triad. Again, this is movable as well, just avoid open strings 5 and 1. So, in the harmonized major scale, the only dominant 7 chord is on the 5th scale degree. This is super significant. For one, we can now use 5-7 chords to determine key. You see, I can stare at a G major triad all day and without additional context have no idea whether I'm looking at a 1 chord, a 4 chord, or a 5 chord. But a G7 must be 5 in the key of C. The distance between the 5 chord and the 1 chord and key center is a 4th. So given the dominant 7 chord, count up a 4th to determine the key. B7, therefore, must be 5 in the key of E, and E7 must be 5 in the key of A. A7 must be 5 in the key of D. D7 must be 5 in the key of G. G7 must be 5 in the key of C. And C7 must be 5 in the key of F. In addition to always functioning as 5, dominant 7 chords resolve up a 4th to 1. That term resolution, one of my favorite music theory terms, because a 5-7 chord moving to its 1 sounds like a resolution. Let's look at why. Here's a G7 chord resolving to C major. 5, 1. Now when we say G7, this is shorthand for saying the group of pitches G, B, D, and F. And C major is short for the group of pitches C, E, and G. So we're hearing G, B, D, F move to C, E, and G. Now ironically, perhaps, the root of the 5-7 chord has little to do with the sense of resolution to 1, since it's totally consonant with both chords. The real essence and uniqueness of a 5-7 chord is the tension created by the 3rd and the flat 7, a diminished 5th. The longer we listen to this interval, the more tension we feel and the greater the sense of resolution will be when we finally move to 1. When this happens, we hear the B move up a half step to C, and the F move down a half step to E, and we exchange the tension of the diminished 5th for the comparatively stable sounding major 3rd. By comparison, if we move to any other chord, even one within that key, we don't feel and hear that same sense of resolution. Except 6. 6, called the relative minor of 1, has the same major 3rd as 1, and so we feel a very similar sense of resolution when 5 moves to 6. One more note. In the video introducing the harmonized major scale, link below, I rudely dismissed the triad on the 7th scale degree since it's better introduced here. The diminished triad found on the 7th degree of a harmonized major scale is identical to a non-root dominant 7 or 5/7 and will behave the same. Here's G7 to C. Here's B diminished to C. Again, G7 to C, B diminished. But you can hear that harmonically they're essentially doing the same thing. So the diminished triad very commonly functions like 5/7 without its root. Maybe think of it as similar to a G7 over B. Much more on diminished chords to come, but this will do for now. Good place to take a breath. Whew. If you're still here, give yourself a pat on the back and give this page a like and subscribe so that you won't miss upcoming videos on all the additional material that this channel hopes to discuss in the future. Now, what happens when we see a chord progression with two different 5/7 chords? Here's the chord progression to the Buck Owens hit, Act Naturally, perhaps most famously covered by the Beatles on the Help album. The first section's straightforward enough, simply a 1-4-5 progression in the key of G. 1, 4, 1, 5, resolves to 1, 4, 5, resolves to 1. But in the second section, we have two different 5/7 chords, A7 and D7. D7 is the same 5/7 chord we've already seen in the first section, so the A7 is really the oddball here. Called a secondary dominant, it is a brief modulation to a different key. Listening to this, you can kind of feel that we've drifted out of key. 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. So how does this work? Any chord in the harmonized major scale can be preceded by its own unique 5/7 chord. Compositionally, this is great, since it nearly doubles the palette of chords we get to work with. And now, rather than feeling stuck with major triads on 1, 4, and 5, and minor triads on 2, 3, and 6, any one of those chords can be preceded by its very own 5/7. Let's move to the key of C for the most simplicity, since we won't have to complicate things further with sharps or flats. Here's a 1 chord, C, moving to a 6 chord, A minor. Now let's dominantly prepare that A minor with its own 5/7 chord. From A, count up 5. A, B, C, D, E. ID'd as the 5 of 6. The 5 chord of the 6 chord. Now here is 1, 5 of 6, 6. Here's 1 to 6 again. Dominantly prepared 6. This is different and arguably more colorful and interesting movement to 6. And because of the tension of the E7 chord and its resolution to 6, that 6 chord sounds necessary when we hear it. Again, 1, 5 of 6, 6. Here's a move from 1 to 2, C major to D minor. Now we will precede 2 with its own 5/7. Count up to D, E, F, G, A, right? And now we have 1, A7, 5 of 2, 2. Again, here's 1 to 2. Here's a dominantly prepared 2. Here's 1 to 5/7, or C to G. Again, 1, 5. Now dominantly preparing 5 with its own dominant 7, count up 5 from G, G, A, B, C, D, and here's 1, D7, 5 of 5, G7. Again, 1 to 5, or 1, 5 of 5, 5, back to 1. Super cool. Now, given the secondary dominant, how do we efficiently ID it? A secondary dominant is identified numerically, first as 5, since all dominant 7 chords are 5, and also with its point of resolution within the original key. Let's stay in the key of C. How do we ID E7? Well, we know that it's 5, since dominant 7 chords are always 5, and again, by counting up a fourth, we can find its point of resolution. So E, F, G, A, which is 6 in the key of C, and thus E7 gets ID'd as 5 of 6. And in this context, E7 resolves to A minor. What about A7? Again, simply count up a fourth. A, B, C, D, which is 2 in the key of C. So A7 is labeled 5 of 2. And A7 resolves to D minor. Back to the key of G and act naturally, where G is our 1 chord and D7 is 5. A7 is also 5, but in the key of D, right? A, B, C, D. So A7 is the 5 chord of the 5 chord, labeled 5 of 5. And the D7 here is being dominantly prepared by its own 5-7 chord, A7. But what about something like this? Here is the A section of Sweet Georgia Brown. The only 5-7 chord that's resolving to a non-dominant chord is the D7 to G. And now, here is my 2, 5, 1. A7 resolves up a fourth, dominantly preparing the D7, and is labeled 5 of 5. E7 resolves up a fourth, dominantly preparing the A7, and is labeled 5 of 2, A being the second scale degree in the key of G. The turnaround back to the top, B7 resolves up fourth to E, dominantly preparing the E7 and is labeled 5 of 6, since E is the 6th scale degree in our key of G. Here's the whole progression. 5 of 2, resolves to 5 of 5, resolves to 5 of 1, 5 of 6. So this is a bit more complicated now, as we have 5-7 chords preparing other 5-7 chords. And you're no doubt wondering why so much of contemporary popular music is so content using so few tools. In summary, dominant 7 chords are always 5, and always resolve up a fourth to their own 1. And secondary dominants are numerically identified as 5 of their point of resolution. Always. Except when they don't. One huge caveat regarding dominant 7 chords, which I considered including in this video, but it's really better to address separately, since it comes from its own unique and separate tradition of composition. And so we'll avoid any further confusion now by including that discussion here. But the good news is, a fine introduction and explanation of that is around the corner. So continue to follow this channel, and you won't miss it.